Hello everyone, welcome to MediaNama. India's much awaited data protection law is now here, and among several concerns related to our privacy rights that remain unaddressed even now, one of the contentious provisions exempts publicly available data from the ambit of the law. For example, if you're a blogger and you've made your personal data publicly available through social media while blogging, then processing of that data won't be protected under the data protection law. MediaNama founder-editor Nikhil Pahwa is here to mainly talk about the implications of this particular provision on artificial intelligence and use of such data for training AI models by AI companies and big tech companies. So, firstly, Nikhil, what is the correlation between publicly available data and development of AI tools? Could you please explain that?
Thanks, Aswati. So the way AI works is that it processes a vast amount of data, and specifically generative AI. And using that vast amount of data, it creates probabilistic outcomes. So, for example, if let's say there is a sentence, there's a that says, this is a phone, right? Um, it then it basically identifies whether this is a whether this it could be a bird, it could be a plane, it could be a train, but it looks at the probability of it being a phone, and then
Hmm.
generates that description, right? So sometimes when we fill out captcha, we also identify where a bicycle might be, or where a fire hydrant, etc., which is a car or a bus. We're all training AI when we do that. That's one way. The other is that we put a vast amount of information in the public domain. Let's say an explanation for a question on Reddit. So AI processes all of that information, and then through a learning process, a large language model, it understands what the probability of a correct outcome might be. So if you use OpenAI or such tools, there's a setting there called temperature, and the temperature setting allows you to modulate how creative AI can be versus how specific AI can be. So the more creative it is, the more likely it is to use out words or outcomes with less probability, and the more specific you allow it to be, it tries to be more accurate about what the outcome is. So AI is not a monolith, but it's all based on processing vast amounts of data, and then identifying what might be the right outcome. Important part is it is about processing data. It's about if AI is going to construct a particular sentence together, then that sentence will have, let's say, accuracy of spellings. And so whether this is the correct spelling or not is also determined on the basis of processing data. Whether one word should follow the next is dependent on is on processing this data and how those sentences are constructed. So it's all linked. And so the dependency of AI on data is quite significant for training AI in particular, so that the outcomes are such that are useful for human beings. Um, and so, that's the dependence of AI on data. And what we've seen is that there are, for example, Twitter shut off its APIs because it seems that AI sites were being used to scrape a vast amount of data from Twitter. I remember when we moved MediaNama to a new server, we got hit by a large number of bots. And when we looked at where the traffic was coming from, what those bots were, a lot of them were AI bots that were trying to scrape our content, right? So it's a contentious issue, because someone's building an entire business based on your content or your information or what you have created, and it can not only be used to, let's say, make you redundant. So, for example, if you look at the data protection bill, and we've had the most comprehensive coverage on the data protection bill in this country, in the world. Um, and now, if it processes all of that information, you don't need to come to us to read it anymore. If AI has scraped it, right? You can get answers directly from AI software. Uh, and so, for a publisher, that becomes a bone of contention that our data is being scraped without our consent. Um, the other is that are issues of surveillance. So, for example, Clearview AI is a facial recognition
Hmm.
software that is trained primarily on people's photographs that are posted in the public domain. And in fact, there was a lawsuit in the US against Clearview, which it lost. It's a violation of privacy. If you remember when ChatGPT first came out, one of the first things that happened was that the privacy regulator in Italy banned ChatGPT because it was violating user privacy. So, when publicly available personal data is collected, processed, used to train, there are multiple issues that pop up, including privacy violation, including copyright violation. Now, w- uh, every public, let's say if your photo is online, and you've taken your own photo, maybe a selfie, right? You have two rights to that photo. One is privacy rights, which are there in your facial structure, in which is your persona, right? Uh, and remember, there are celebrities that are now selling their 3D models and their personas.
Mm.
Like I think Bruce Willis has sold his so that he can appear in movies, maybe even after he's died, right? So there is a one is a privacy right, the other would be, let's say, a copyright. So
Mm.
you would have a copyright to your selfie because you have constructed it. Now, if you post it on a social network and you look at the terms and conditions of social networks take from you a non-exclusive right to use that information because it's being published on their platform. So they've actually legally taken a right from you when you post something on social media that they can also use it.
Mm.
So two rights, copyright and privacy rights. What the data protection bill does is that it strips us of privacy rights when it comes to information that we have put in the public domain.
Mm.
And just because something is publicly available doesn't mean that privacy rights are not a part of it. It's like, do you have rights against someone photographing you without your consent in public? You do. But there are fair usage clauses, there are public interest clauses that also allow, let's say, for the celebrity, that allow them that to be used. But for an individual, they can still claim privacy rights there. Just because they're in the public doesn't mean that someone can photograph them and basically that they don't have any privacy rights there.
Right. So, what could be the possible reasoning or reasons for pre-processing of publicly available personal data without consent under India's data protection law? Like, are there any circumstances where it can be justified? For example, you said public interest, so misinformation, like tackling misinformation could be one of them.
In fact, one of the interesting things about this bill is that one major public interest reason for processing personal data without consent, in public interest, is actually journalism, and they have missed an
Mhm.
exclusion for journalism. But at the same time, they have an exclusion for AI. I mean, I see this
Mm.
as a exclusion for two reasons. One is AI, the other is surveillance. Um,
Mm.
so we know that there is a vast exemption for the Indian government. Now we know that there are CCTVs that are put all over, that are getting put all over the country. Now, if
Mm.
and there was a plan from the government to create something called an automated facial recognition system that would take in feeds from CCTVs and be used to identify people.
Right.
And that's public information. That's public. Those CCTVs are in public. So one major question is: are you protected against CCTV surveillance in the public or not? And this bill does not protect you from that.
Mm.
The other is, of course, with respect to content that we make based on social media that can be used to train AI. I don't see a reason to do this except surveillance, to be honest. Um, uh, and what has happened is that for us, in terms of information that we make public about ourselves, we still have copyright to it. We just don't
Mm.
have privacy rights anymore.
Okay. And in what ways will it prove to be an advantage for the big tech companies like, will there be a difference in how big tech companies would leverage this provision and small companies like AI focused companies like OpenAI?
So
Like how
AI,
can,
so OpenAI is not small, but
yeah,
I think many companies that actually use this information have already taken the rights to, like big tech firms have already taken the rights to use information that you give to them
huh,
under under the terms and conditions when you sign up. In fact, you might remember that there was recently a controversy around Zoom when they said that
hmm,
they will be able to use information for training AI on information on Zoom calls for training AI if you've given your
right,
consent to using Zoom, right? And so people, it's not that people aren't concerned about uh, their information being used, whether for facial recognition purposes or for training facial AI, facial recognition AI. Um, so I don't know whether this will really benefit big tech because they already have many of them have consent in their terms and conditions.
hmm,
Google Photos is one example where if you upload your photos, it's able to identify who a person is in a photo after a while. Or you, if you log into Google Photos, it clubs like different, like it identifies a few individuals and it asks you to add a name to it because it's clubbed information of all of those
hmm,
individuals together, right? That face, that photo, that individual,
right, right,
all of them are in the same sort of under that face, under that tab. So Google's already using it for photos, for example. So big tech are not going to benefit, but yes, other companies, upstarts like OpenAI, which have
hmm,
already processed and are now being sued, by the way, across the world for processing copyrighted information without consent, they will have full freedom to do it. My sense is we seem to have lost privacy rights here when it comes to
hmm,
big tech, but we still have copyright. It
right,
depends on whether someone will go to court to challenge it on a copyright basis or not. When it comes to uh, smaller companies, I think this is mostly going to be a surveillance mechanism, to be honest. Remember, there was this company called Zinua Corp, and this was a story which the Indian Express broke in 2010. And I was on a couple of TV shows on this. It became a huge issue for a couple of days. There's a company called Zinua Corp, which is a Chinese company, which was basically profiling Indian citizens over a period of time. Um, and they'd identified some 10, 15,000 Indian citizens that they were profiling. Um,
hmm,
and they were doing it using publicly available personal information. That
right,
kind of surveillance, uh, because of this data protection bill, is no longer illegal.
hmm,
The other important aspect to consider is that when you have given consent to being profiled, you have the right to withdraw the consent and therefore the right
right,
to erasure of that data once that consent is withdrawn. But the bill specifically excludes non consensual processing uh, from deletion, which means if you made
hmm,
certain information public, anyone can process that information and you can't even get it deleted. So if
right,
someone scraped your photographs of either Facebook or Twitter, your display pictures, or someone else, if they posted a photograph of you, once they've scraped it off social media, now you can't even get it deleted. That's utterly ridiculous.
right. So when uh, privacy rights are ultimately impacted, and we are seeing that countries like Italy, Canada, Japan are already pulling up OpenAI for non-consented use of personal data. How come Indian regulators have failed to address this in our data protection law?
And
Is there any
honestly,
a short?
I can't speak for the regulators. I can't speak for the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. I don't know why they have gone ahead and done this. I just see this more as a surveillance and profiling clause, nothing more. Remember, the data protection bill also allows them to take data from any private party about an individual. And so, under those circumstances, for all you know, in future you might see a social credit system on Indian citizens, just like there was in China. Uh, Maybe it won't be public because there'll be a greater outrage over here, but you'll that might be one reason, but I can't understand why this is there. Um, I don't know how there will be restrictions. I think the Minister of State for IT, Rajiv Chandrasekhar, said in a statement sometime that you will be able to get this information deleted. But looking at the law,
Mhm.
it doesn't look like that's the case. I think the minister's wrong about this.
Right. Okay, thanks, Nikhil. That was all about impact of India's data protection law on artificial intelligence. For our viewers, MediaNama team has done an in-depth coverage of the DPDP bill. Click on the link below this video to read our stories and also to follow us for more tech policy updates. Thanks.